Hi, my name is Jack Amendolia, and I work for a firm called Watson and Associates. We were hired to help the board with the school boundary review that they're conducting for all their schools in the city of Oshawa. There are a lot of schools involved and a lot of moving parts, and the school board thought it would be helpful to do some short videos for each school community to explain why the board is doing a citywide boundary review in Oshawa and how it might impact their school communities.
So before we talk about any specific data and scenarios that are impacting St. John the 23rd and your school community, I just want to take a minute or two to talk about the process and then talk a little bit about why a school board might do a boundary review and some of the conditions that are typically present when a school board does consider a review.
The material that is being presented is based on options that the Board of Trustees agreed to have staff take to the community for input. These are not the final recommendations, but really are intended to provide potential options for your input and feedback. The committee, made up of various board staff, school principals, and a school council representative from each school, will review the feedback and then prepare final recommendations. Those recommendations will be brought back to all of Oshawa via virtual meeting on May 4th, 2023. So why does a school board do a school boundary review or an attendance area review? Well, there's a variety of reasons why a board might conduct a review. Right now, we're going to explore some of the main ones. One of the primary reasons is enrollment pressures, and that means when the enrollment at a school is significantly over what that school was built for. And a school board looks at boundary reviews or changing those boundaries as a way to try to alleviate that enrollment. Again, assuming there are schools close by or somewhat close by that can take that additional enrollment. The other reason why a board might consider a boundary review is when a new school opens. If that new school requires a new boundary and it impacts some of the existing schools, again, a boundary review may be necessary to determine what that new school's boundary will look like. Another reason is an enrollment imbalance, similar to the first point about enrollment pressures. The school board may have some schools that are significantly over capacity. They may have some schools that are under capacity, and they may need to just try to better balance or equalize enrollment for those various schools. And then the last one is program. So if a board has, for example, a French immersion program, and they are looking to either expand that program or offer it in a different way or change the boundaries of that program, that's another reason why a school board might do a boundary review. In the case of this review, and like I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, it's a citywide review, fairly complex, a lot of schools involved. And the other thing is that all of these things, all of these reasons about why a school board might do a boundary review are present in some form in the City of Oshawa review.
So on this slide, what we're looking at are all the enrollments of the elementary and secondary schools that are involved in the Oshawa Boundary Review. What the table is showing is the schools, as well as in this column where it says OTG, that's referring to on-the-ground capacity, which is really the facility's permanent bricks and mortar capacity, what it was built and designed for. Does not include temporary spaces like portables. Shows all the enrollments by school, by grade, total enrollment, and the utilization rates that we see in the last column are simply a reflection of a percentage of the enrollment compared to the school's capacity. One thing we notice when we look at those utilization rates, a lot of schools operating over capacity, just a couple of schools that are operating below capacity, a couple that are operating right around capacity. So pretty good diversity in the range of utilization rates at the elementary schools across Oshawa. What's highlighted in that red box is your school and the resultant capacities, enrollments, and utilization rates. We see that St. John the 23rd was built with a capacity of 314. According to October 31st, 2022 enrollment numbers, the school had 233 students in it for a utilization rate of 74%. And of all the schools in this boundary review, that has the lowest utilization rate, and there's really only two schools that are operating well below 100% in the City of Oshawa, two elementary schools, St. Hedwig and St. John the 23rd. This next slide, we're going to look at same enrollments that are based on October 2022 enrollments, same numbers. All we've done is we've just separated out the English enrollment and the French immersion enrollment. In the city of Oshawa, the board offers French immersion programming at 3 of its elementary schools. They're what's referred to as dual track elementary schools because they offer both English and French immersion programming. Those 3 schools are St. Christopher, St. Kateri, and St. Thomas. Right now, French immersion elementary enrollment in the city is about 537 students, represents about 11.5% of the total enrollment. Of the total enrollment at the 3 schools that offer French immersion makes up about 41% of the total at St. Kateri, about 29% at St. Christopher, and about 36% at St. Thomas. So the next couple slides, we're going to look at we've been talking about school boundaries and some of the implications surrounding school boundaries. But this slide and map gives everyone an idea of what these boundaries actually look like spatially. How big are they? How small are they? Where is the school building located within that boundary? How do they relate to each other? How do they relate to the city as a whole? So I think this map gives everyone a good spatial understanding of what those boundaries look like. We can see in the bottom right in green is St. John the 23rd, and we've highlighted that by putting a red circle around it. This next slide looks very similarly at the school boundaries and what we just examined. But all we've done here is we've created a heat map with those boundaries based on the utilization of space I spoke about a couple of minutes ago. And you see the legend, it's quite easily to follow on the bottom left hand, but quickly, really anywhere you see sort of orange, red colors, those are high utilized schools. Anywhere you see more of this green color, pretty much schools at capacity. And anywhere you see these cooler colors are schools that have some surplus space. And you can see that St. John is one of those schools.
The scenarios considered for part of this review really fall into a few main categories. The first one is school boundary changes. So we're talking about a traditional school boundary change where we look at moving the line to either make the boundary larger or smaller. The second is grade structure changes. So the new approved Monsignor Paul Dwyer Secondary School has been approved as a grade 7 to 12 school. So as part of this review, the board is interested in hearing from the community about possibly which grade 7 and 8 from which schools should go to the new secondary school. And the third main part of this review had to deal with French immersion programming. As we talked about previously, there's currently 3 dual track French immersion schools. So we looked at a diverse set of options all the way from status quo, leaving it as it is, to 1 single track facility for the whole city, multiple single track facilities, combinations of single track and dual track. So really all options were considered.
So now let's get into some of the considerations and scenarios that we brought forward to the public that have a specific impact on St. John the 23rd. So the options surrounding St. John are one of where if any of these options are accepted and approved, the boundary would get larger and enrollment would go up. And it surrounds the option that we looked at involving a couple of other schools in the area as well. So one of the options concerns enrollment pressures at St. Joseph, and that's the area in blue denoted by the number 1 on the map. St. Joseph currently at around 136% of utilization of its permanent space. So what this boundary review or this boundary suggestion tries to look at or do is to see if some of that enrollment at St. Joseph or that pressure can be alleviated, done by sending enrollment in this blue area south to Sir Albert Love. And then where St. John comes into the mix, this area here that we see denoted by the number 2 is actually part of Sir Albert Love's boundary. You can see the similar colors there. It's what we refer to as a satellite boundary because it's not, necessarily contiguous with the original boundary. So under this consideration, what's being talked about is in addition to this move, to take this satellite area and send it south to John the 23rd. So basically you would alleviate some or remove some enrollment at Sir Albert Love to be able to accept this St. Joseph enrollment. And at the same time, you would be increasing enrollment at John the 23rd, basically bringing it up to about 100% capacity. So what are the implications for St. John the 23rd under some of the scenarios being considered? Fairly self-explanatory based on what I just spoke about. Under the scenario being considered, St. John the 23rd's territory or boundary would be expanded northward to incorporate the satellite area from Sir Robert Love, increasing utilization of space from 74% to about 100%.
To finish off tonight's presentation, I just want to talk a little bit about what we've heard so far from the Oshawa community. So we've had a couple of community level meetings. We've had some committee level meetings. We've had a couple of surveys that have gone out to the public, as well as feedback that can be provided to the board through a general email address. And from that feedback, there's a couple of things that are starting to come from it. One thing that we're starting to hear is that there seems to be a preference for single track French immersion programming. There seems to be a preference for two facilities in the city of Oshawa rather than one. When I want specifically with regard to single track French immersion programming, a lot of the feedback wants to see a reduction in this enrollment pressure that we spoke about. There is a concern or a consideration to try as much as we can to keep communities together. And the public also wants us to consider, with regard to any changes that might be made, what transportation implications there are, how long students might be on a bus for. When we look at one question that we were asked, or that we asked the community early on in the process, what are some of the initial issues you see with some of the existing conditions at your school? You can see that about 50%, a little bit over 50% of the responses are either enrollment pressures or too many portables. So I think there's a clear understanding in the community that there's schools that are operating above capacity, and that something needs to be done to deal with some of that enrollment pressure. And that's why the board is undergoing this boundary review. So I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video tonight. I hope you found it informative. But if there are any questions, we will continue to reach out to the community. A lot of information can be found on the board's website and a couple of meetings coming up. Thank you.